You hear about a naval blockade in the Persian Gulf, and you probably think it's a classic geopolitical story, right? All about oil tankers and global politics. But what if I told you its most profound impact wasn't on oil, but on the very data centers that power our digital world? Today, we're going to trace a pretty surprising chain reaction, starting with military strategy and ending up with the tiny silicon wafers that run our lives. Let's connect the dots.
So that's the big question here. How can a few warships in a strait threaten server racks on the other side of the planet? It seems like a huge leap, I know. But by following the dominoes as they fall, one by one, we're going to see exactly how a single point of tension can send a shockwave through the entire global tech industry.
And here's the roadmap for how we'll do it. We're going to start with the initial action itself. Then we'll look at the direct reaction it caused and the ripple effect across the region. From there, we'll zoom out to see how the great powers responded, which leads us straight into a global supply shock. And finally, we'll wrap up with what this all means for business, a whole new reality. It's a clear chain of cause and effect, and we're going to follow it step by step.
Okay, let's dive in with that first link in the chain. Everything kicks off with one single decisive move made by the United States. So picture this. Diplomatic talks have completely broken down. The U.S. decides to take a major step. On April 15, 2026, it puts a naval cordon in place. Now, the stated goals were pretty clear. First, put economic pressure on Iran by cutting off its exports. And second, make sure the Strait of Hormuz stays, as the U.S. president put it, open, free, and clear. And make no mistake, the scale of this was huge. We're talking over 10,000 U.S. personnel, a whole fleet of warships, and the sky buzzing with aircraft. The effect was immediate. In just the first 24 hours, commercial traffic through that cordon ground to a complete halt. Zero. This wasn't a warning shot. It was a wall.
Now, when you make a move that big, you have to expect a reaction. And that brings us to the second link in our chain, Iran's immediate response to the blockade. Iran's condemnation came fast, and it was fierce. Officials did not mince words. They called the blockade an act of war and, as you see here, economic terrorism. That kind of language immediately cranked the tension way, way up. So in response, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps started talking about what it calls asymmetric responses. This wasn't about meeting force with force. It was about creating chaos. The threats included a full closure of the strait, hitting U.S. assets in the area, targeting tankers from nations that supported the U.S., and even activating proxy groups in totally different regions. The whole strategy was designed to create maximum uncertainty. Of course, a standoff like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It sent massive ripples across the entire neighborhood, forcing countries to pick a side and creating a pretty complex and divided landscape. And you can see how the region basically split right down the middle. In one corner, you've got nations like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel, who were either quietly or very openly supportive of the U.S. move. And in the other corner, you have countries like Turkey, calling it destabilizing, and then the smaller Gulf states who were just terrified of the economic fallout and getting caught in the crossfire. So, beyond just the immediate region, this crisis quickly starts to pull in the world's great powers. Now China and Russia are forced to get involved, and each of them has very different interests at stake. And their reactions are really telling. For China, which is Iran's #1 oil customer, this is a direct threat to their energy security, so they jump in offering to mediate. Russia, on the other hand, condemns the U.S. action, sure, but they also see a little bit of an upside. Higher oil prices are good for them, all while they're deepening military ties with Iran. So you've got two major powers with two very different playbooks. Okay, this is the moment. This is where all that geopolitical maneuvering starts to hit the real economy. We're about to connect the dots directly from that conflict in the waterway, all the way to the silicon wafer at the heart of our technology. So first, logistics get thrown into total chaos. The Strait of Hormuz is now a high-risk zone, so ships have to take the long way around Africa. And the impact is pretty stark. You're adding an extra 10 to 14 days of travel time. And the cost? It skyrockets by 30 to 50%. Instantly, everything just got slower and a whole lot more expensive. But here's the hidden vulnerability, the real twist that nobody saw coming. The instability in the region made an existing problem at Qatar's giant Ras Laffan gas complex much, much worse. Now, that facility is a major global source of helium, and this disruption, it took a staggering 30 to 38% of the entire world's helium supply offline. So, why on earth does that matter?
Well, it matters because of this thing called semiconductor yield. You see, helium is absolutely critical for making the computer chips that power, well, everything. It's used for supercooling and for creating the totally pure environments you need to manufacture them. So less helium means a lower yield. It means you get fewer working chips from every single wafer. And that leads us directly to the tech fallout. With chip yields down, manufacturers have to make tough choices. They prioritize the expensive, high-margin AI chips over the ones that go into everyday consumer goods. At the exact same time, all this chaos is making energy prices go wild, which squeezes the profit margins of AI data centers. And of course, all the uncertainty means plans for new data centers get delayed. The chain reaction is now complete. So, as you can imagine, this whole sequence of events was a massive wake-up call for global businesses. It fundamentally changed how they calculate risk and forced them to adapt to a new, more unpredictable reality.
So what are companies actually doing about it? They're getting smarter. They're trying to build in resilience. They're locking in long-term energy contracts to avoid price spikes. They're investing in new tech to recycle that scarce helium. They're completely rethinking where they build new data centers. And maybe biggest of all, they're ditching the old hyper-efficient just-in-time supply chain for a safer, more redundant just-in-case strategy.
And really, when you boil it all down, the events of 2026 taught the business world a huge lesson, and it's summed up perfectly right here. You just can't have one without the other anymore. A tech company's access to stable energy is now just as crucial to its survival as its next big, innovative idea.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We just saw how a naval blockade can threaten data centers because of a helium shortage, a connection almost no one would have made beforehand. It forces us all to think differently about risk and to ask ourselves, in my industry, in my company, in my own life, what is the overlooked dependency? What is the unexpected weak link that I haven't even thought about yet?